Hi everybody. Okay, so in this video we're going to be looking at the invasion of Poland and then the responsibility for the outbreak of war. I'm just going to start with what I was talking about at the end of the last video about the Nazi-Soviet Pact, and we're going to have a look at a few cartoons that explore the relationship between Hitler and Stalin. So we'll start with that and then we'll go on to the invasion of Poland and then finish off with the responsibility for war. So this is the one that I was talking about. So it says someone's taking someone for a walk, and then here this is labeled the Eastern Frontier. Now this is figure on the left is Stalin, the figure on the right is Hitler. You can see they're looking quite pally, they're walking together. They've got here their legs tied together, which is representing the Nazi-Soviet Pact and that bond that they've made. They're looking quite chummy, they're walking down the street, you know, they've got their arms around each other, but behind each other's backs, they're both holding a gun. And this demonstrates to us what their relationship was actually like. This symbolizes that actually they've got a deep mistrust of each other, even though this symbolizes their alliance, okay, that was never going to be sustainable for either of them. Now, this cartoon is another one that demonstrates their relationship. This is Hitler bowing. So the fact that they're bowing to each other and their facial expressions, it does sort of suggest a sign of respect. The fact that they're bowing to each other, they're faux, which means fake. They've got faux politeness, because they're actually, even though they've got these gestures that suggest that they're friends and they're working together and they're allies, we have a look at their speech. The bloody assassin of the workers, I presume, the scum of the earth, I believe. Okay, so what they're saying is actually what they're thinking. So again, this shows that they don't actually have any respect for each other. And our key word here is faux, okay, which means fake, like faux fur. Now, this figure on the floor represents Poland. So they have this faux mutual respect for each other because they both want Poland. And the reason that they have this alliance for a short amount of time is because they have mutually taken over Poland and are sharing the profits from that. And then just one more, which shows how unlikely the rest of the world thought their alliance was. Not behaving now. So this is Poland saying wow, and Nazi Germany as a fox and Soviet Russia as a bear in bed together. So obviously this just shows how shocked, especially Poland, were at this alliance, and how worried Poland were about this alliance, because they knew then that they were going to be invaded. It wasn't a question anymore. The question for Poland at this point, after what had happened in Czechoslovakia, was, are we going to be backed up? Okay, so let's have a look then at the invasion of Poland. So we know from looking at the League of Nations and the depth that we have, that their aim, the whole point of them being set up in the 1920s, was to avoid another war. Just going to pause it a sec. I've just got rid of something there by accident. Okay, so the aim of the League of Nations was to prevent a war from happening. And in the 1930s, we know that there were a policy of appeasement towards Hitler and Mussolini in the hope of stopping a war happening, when actually what happened was the policy of appeasement just allowed the dictators to grow even stronger and made war even more inevitable. So on the 1st of September 1939, so just after the Nazi-Soviet Pact was signed in August, Hitler's troops entered Poland, and 2 days later, the British and the French declared war on Hitler's Germany. So Chamberlain issued a statement to Hitler and said, if you remove your troops from Poland by 11 o'clock, then there won't be a war. If you don't, then a state of war will exist between us. And that's exactly what happened. So the invasion of Poland is the start of the war, and it happened because we know, due to appeasement, Hitler was confident that he could invade Poland with ease. Poland didn't have any natural fortifications. There was nothing stopping Hitler going in. They didn't particularly have a strong army themselves. They were reliant on the help of Britain and France if they were to be invaded. So Hitler has the might of the USSR on his side and was convinced that Britain and France would continue their policy of appeasement, but they had signed an agreement with Poland guaranteeing its security from Nazi attack. So appeasement had failed by the invasion of Czechoslovakia, and by the time that Hitler invaded Poland, it was 100% certain that Britain would help the Polish. So a German battleship opened fire on the port of Danzig in Poland, and Danzig had been made an independent state by the Treaty of Versailles. Poland ran it, but 90% of the population was German. And at the same time, 62 divisions of the German army and 1,300 Luftwaffe, remember the air force that Hitler was not allowed, according to the Treaty of Versailles, invaded Poland. And the Polish air force was caught on the ground and obliterated. So they had no air defense to stop the Luftwaffe. So generals were worried that they were still not ready for war. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because we've seen that Hitler is able to rearm and he's building it up, but even by 1939, they were worried. And they leaked plans to Britain in the hope that it would force Hitler to abandon his plans. Hitler ignored his generals' concerns and made them swear oaths of loyalty to him. Now, this is what we were saying before. The British sent an ultimatum to Germany. They were told to withdraw their troops from Poland by 11 o'clock, or Britain would then declare war on Germany. No reply came, and then France also declared war. So Poland was overrun by Nazi and Soviet troops within 4 weeks and was completely taken over. Hitler was convinced that Britain and France would back down. He was wrong, and the Second World War had started. So why? We've covered now the entire of the 1918 to 1939 course, and we've spoken a lot about the events that happened, the road to war, the responsibility of the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations. So now we're just going to sum it up. What were the main causes? Now, it is up to you to decide what you think the main cause was. And what I would recommend is that you do have a really good think about it and have it in your head, because maybe, I mean, the beauty of this paper for me is that there's not actually that much they can ask you. It's in 3 sections. It's in the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations, and then the road to war. So your 16, well, your 20 with your 4 spag marks, mark question, your essay question is going to ask you to balance something up. And if you were to get a question that was on the reasons for the outbreak of the war, you can already have written that essay, because they might say to you, the Nazi-Soviet Pact was the main cause of World War II. How far do you agree? If you know what you agree with, you can then have that argument already ready in your head. And if it is the Nazi-Soviet Pact, you just agree with the statement, you have 2 points to disagree with it. If they say appeasement was the main cause, have a paragraph already ready. Have a paragraph ready for all of them. And then you've got that in your head, and it just takes the pressure off that question. I mean, it might not be on the road to war, but you know, that's the level of revision that you need to be doing so that you're prepared for whatever comes at you in this exam. Okay, so the following diagram attempts to summarize it. So was Hitler to blame? So Hitler hated communism and wanted to stop it by controlling Russia. He would have to invade. So from the start, we know Hitler has a motivation to start a war. Mein Kampf, Hitler said the only way to make Germany strong again was to overturn the Treaty of Versailles. The only way he could do that was by going to war and taking back all the territory that had been taken from him. Hitler's foreign policy aims were to overturn the Treaty of Versailles, create a Greater Germany, and again, he would have to invade countries. All of these things point to the idea that Hitler wanted war, because as it says, the only way he could achieve these foreign policy aims was war. So therefore, the policy of appeasement, you could argue, was never going to work, which takes us to appeasement. Opportunities to stop Hitler were missed. Now, we did say when we talked about the remilitarization of the Rhineland, Hitler himself said that he could have been stopped at that point, and that opportunity was missed. People were desperate to repeat the horrors of the First World War, that should say. Chamberlain did make a mistake in trusting Hitler. Politicians like Chamberlain were to blame because they did allow Hitler to get away with it. The alienation of Stalin, which I talked about a lot in the last video, then led to the Nazi-Soviet Pact. Hitler did not have to face war on two fronts. I'm going to highlight and put that in a square because I think that's so important. Hitler was backed up and had the power of the USSR and allowed Hitler to invade Poland, which ultimately was the trigger for the war. The Depression, this is really important. I mean, there's levels, aren't there? I do think that the with Hitler in charge, the war wouldn't have happened without the Nazi-Soviet Pact, but I do think that without the Depression, the Nazis probably wouldn't have risen to power because it made people so desperate. They were preoccupied with their own problems and therefore didn't really support the League of Nations. And the League of Nations could not afford to put effective economic sanctions on aggressors, so it lost one of its main powers. And now I'm going through this very quickly, but obviously you can feel free to pause and read this again at your own leisure. So the League of Nations, their failure in Manchuria, their weakness, so Hitler didn't worry about them so much. Abyssinia, you know, it showed because they had no army, they had no legs for action, showed that Britain and France would undermine the League. There was no point in it being there. And it showed that acts of aggression would not be dealt with effectively. So a load of reasons there. And then finally, we'll go on to the Treaty of Versailles. So it was Hitler too harsh on Germany, and Hitler promised to right the wrongs. And remember, again, linked to the Depression, if it weren't for the Treaty of Versailles, the German people might not be so badly done to by the Depression. Territory was taken from Russia, and this is what ultimately signed the convinced Russia to sign the Nazi-Soviet Pact because they wanted some of Poland back. The new states of Czechoslovakia, remember particularly in Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, Hitler was determined to reunite these people and therefore take over those lands. And Britain felt that Hitler should be allowed to overturn the treaty and didn't intervene to prevent events such as Anschluss at first. So if we have a look at that entire diagram, there are a myriad of reasons. If you were to get a question on, as we've just said, on the road to war, use this diagram and have those arguments ready. And why I like this diagram so much is it shows you how they're all linked, because the thing in that 16-mark question, as we've said, is to show how each of the causes relate to each other and influence each other, because it's not like the road to war just went along a really smooth path. These events are interconnected. There are different times when they could have gone in different ways, and how one event led to another and then connected to different countries. It's all very intricate and all very complex, and what you need to work at is understanding how they are all linked and how they relate to one another. Okay, so we've covered now all of the content. So in the final video in this section, I'm going to go over a past paper. Obviously, we aren't going to have time to answer the questions, but I'm going to talk about sort of the approach to the exam and what you can be doing when you get into that exam room to make it much more manageable in terms of your mentality towards the exam rather than the actual content towards it. I think that's important to sort of get your head around what the exam's going to, what it's going to go like once you have done your revision and you've got there. So thank you very much if you've tuned into this whole series. If you haven't, please feel free, obviously, to go back and watch any videos you might have missed. And I hope to see you in the next one when we look at a past paper.